Positive Lens Podcast. I'm your host, Scott T. Each week, we will bring you positive law enforcement news stories from across the globe, shared by departments and citizens like yourself. In our Getting to Know Your Local Leo segment, we will speak with a member of the law enforcement community about everyday life and most things non-law enforcement, as we hope to adjust your focus so you see that members of your local law enforcement community are not much different than you and me. Greetings and welcome to episode 14. In this episode, we will meet John Drozdowski, a police officer, husband, and father. We will learn about his path to law enforcement, favorite comfort food, dreaded household chore, and more, in addition to his founding of the Drozdowski Group. Today's guest in our Getting to Know Your Local Leo segment is an active police officer who has proudly served for 14 years, 6 with the Philadelphia Police Department, and the current 8 years with a suburb department just outside of Philly. He's also the founder of the Drozdowski Group, a group that is dedicated to helping police officers achieve financial freedom. Please welcome to the Your Positive Lens podcast, active police officer, John Drozdowski.
Scott, thank you, and it's an honor to be here. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you being here as well, sir. Let me ask, before we get started, how would you prefer that we address you throughout today's episode?
John's fine. John's fine.
Outstanding. So we'll jump right into it, John. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and where were you born, where'd you grow up, and what was it like growing up in the Drozdowski household?
So I am Philadelphia born and raised. I grew up in your standard row home, nothing big, nothing too small. Mom and dad, and I have an identical twin brother. And, if you know anything about where I grew up, I don't know if you've ever seen Kensington on any of the documentaries where it's kind of the East Coast drug capital of the United States. I grew up right next to it in Port Richmond. So just your average Philadelphia home, basically. Nothing too outlandish. And I played video games growing up with my brother all day. That's pretty much the extent. And we just played a ton of sports. So mom, dad they would go to work every day and come home. So my childhood was just like everybody else's for the most part.
Outstanding, and I definitely want to get to you on the sports part of that because sports is one of those things that kids nowadays you hear less about. A lot of times they're inside playing video games, but not outside playing sports. And you had mentioned in your book, and we'll cover that even a little bit later, that you did play baseball. So tell us a little about that. What was the baseball passion, the position you played? How did that all work out?
So it was really just like a push growing up. So with my brother, I like I said, identical twin brother. So him and I were always on every single team together. And we started either like 3 or 4 years old. And we just played a lot of sports, and that kept us out of trouble. And then in the summers, when all the other kids that we went to grade school, maybe they were hanging out on the streets or the basketball courts, and they started drinking in high school and going a different path. We just stayed playing sports. So baseball was the main sport, and what happened was my whole life I played third base. I loved third base. I thought it was great. And I finally got to college, and the shortstop on my college team was injured. So he couldn't play for the rest of the year. And it was before the first game even started. So they wound up making some changes, and I said, "Hey, John, you want to play second base?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I want to play, but I have no clue how to play second base." So I was nervous. And I remember specifically the very first week in spring training down in Florida, if we had 7 games, I probably had 10 errors. Because everything that was hitting me, I was scared. I was nervous. And then I finished this season, I think, with 1 error after that. I finally got comfortable. I just learned to relax. It wasn't like, I just came to my first week in college. So I got better at it. But, yeah, that was a transition for me. And the cool thing about it was I thought second base was way better than third base.
Really?
So, yeah, I liked it. And the rest of my career, I flip-flopped around, but actually playing second base made me a better infielder than just third base.
Well, you went from hot corner to being up the middle, where your range has to be greater at second base than third base.
It does, and what people don't realize is your backhand being at third base, I was always going to the left side, so I had a really good diving side. But playing second base, you got to go to your backhand more. So then eventually when I went over to third base, my backhand was so much better. So I think everybody, if they're starting out the way I did, just have them play shortstop or second base to get the range better, and then go back to third base.
I never really thought much about that piece of it, but when Alex Rodriguez went over to the Yankees many years ago, he moved from shortstop to third base, and
Mhm.
everyone talked about what kind of transition it would be, but it actually worked out well for him too.
Yeah, it's an easier transition than going the opposite way because, like you said, it's the hot corner. So
Yeah,
it's either hit fast at you and you miss it, or you don't have any like too much time to think about anything. So yeah, and that would be my advice. Everyone start shortstop or second base.
and you think about it, playing second base, you were in the middle of the action, which kind of brought you to law enforcement. You're in the middle of the action. What
Yeah.
inspired you to go into the career?
So that is a whole nother issue. So literally, growing up, I have one uncle that was a sheriff,
Okay,
Philadelphia sheriff, and I remember he would always come over to my grandmother's, and he would be in uniform, and he'd have his old school revolver, and I always thought that was cool. But I don't know if that's what actually got me into law enforcement. I want to say it's more of seeing the police in my neighborhood. And like
okay,
literally, it wasn't so much the interactions that I had with police because I really didn't have that many interactions. But if I saw them on my street and they were dealing with a house or people outside, whatever the case may be, I didn't walk on the same side of the street as them.
okay.
I saw them, and it was like out of fear and out of respect that I crossed the street. And I kind of wouldn't even look their way because I just didn't want to get involved. And that was it. And then I just always in my mind, I thought like, wow, they're helping. And then, actually I'm wearing baby blue today is because my Philadelphia uniform, but that we use baby blue as the color.
Okay,
I love blue. And that's the reason I love blue because I saw all the cops and I like baby blue, especially because of that reason. So
it's interesting.
yeah, I don't know if that's it. And then I went to, when I got into high school, my dream was just to be a Navy SEAL. Told my mom, dad, I said, hey, listen, 18 years old, I'm signing up. I want to be a Navy SEAL. They told me no. They said, forget about that. You can't do that. Not because they didn't want me to be a Navy SEAL. They love all the military stuff, but they just don't want me dying. They don't want me to go overseas and
Right.
something happened to me and I, come back all messed up. So then I said, all right, fine, I'll go to college. And that's where sports came in, still played baseball. I had a blast. I have no regrets on that. After college, I decided, well, what am I going to do? And then I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to go back into like the Navy SEAL was over. I was too
Okay.
old. I didn't want anyone screaming in my face. I wasn't going to, wake up at 3 in the morning to go run 10 miles. I like mentally, I was checked out of that. So I decided to use my degree um, in the corporate world. So I decided, hey, let me go try the corporate world. Few years of that, I was the guy sitting in a cubicle. I was standing. I wasn't even sitting in my chair because I just couldn't sit down for that long. And
Yeah.
I just, once I got laid off, then I said, hey, what do I want to do? And I decided, you know, let me try to, the military is a no-go, but what's the next closest thing where I could stay home, still have the majority of my freedom, and still help people? And that's where, the police officer came in at.
And it's been 14 years since.
Yeah, 14 years since, longest job I ever had, but I enjoy it, so it should be.
Yeah, I think that's the key part too. You said you enjoyed it. So when you're waking up, going to be a police officer every day, if you're not enjoying it, the job will, any job, it'll
Yeah.
wear you out. And this is a profession that if there's no enjoyment, the consequences of not enjoying it and just showing up could be, very, very difficult.
So I break it down in two different ways. I have, especially when I was younger and I was in Philadelphia, it was single, no kids. It was amazing. I went to work and it didn't feel like work. It felt more like a baseball game where you're like, oh, I got a baseball game today. I got to go wear my uniform. I got to go play, 7 to 9 innings. And then I get to come home and, hopefully I win the game.
Right.
The problem what I'm seeing in some departments and some officers, it's no longer putting on that uniform for enjoyment. It's more of, oh, I got to go to work for 12 hours. Oh, I got to go
Yeah.
to work. And then that's where it starts. It's no longer fun. And
Okay.
that, like you said, you have to have fun at work. You have to make it enjoyable so you love what you do.
Absolutely. Now that you said the two parts, I know you're in a suburb of Philly now. How is that experience different in a suburb versus when you're in Philly?
So Philadelphia was, it was protect and serve, right? And I know a lot of cops are going to say, hey, you're doing a service by protecting people. Yeah, that's great, but it was like protection was key. I mean, gunshots and you're running to shooting victims and you're scooping people up and you're driving them to the hospital and you're driving kids to the hospital. So it was kind of like a war zone in a way, or at least the closest war zone that I've ever seen.
Right.
And even we had Temple University in Philadelphia. Most of the military surgeons, they actually train at Temple because that's the closest thing in the United States that they could find for training that gets them compared to the military. So it can be wild, depending where you're working and the things you see and the things that you have to do. And then you go over to suburbs. I'm not saying they don't have that, but it's just a different demographic.
Right.
It's more of a suburb setting, more money. It's not that there's no drugs or not that there's no guns, but it's just not out in the open. It's not a war zone. There you get more into the service versus protecting.
Okay.
There it's hey, there's a dead deer in my backyard. Like, can you guys come and help me with the dead deer? And you're kind of like scratching your head, going like, yeah, I guess I can, but I mean, is it really police work? So, not at least the city police work that you're used to, because
Right.
there's no deer in the city. So it's very different. They're all important. You just have to get used to it. It's more of a mental thing of what I thought policing was when I was in Philadelphia versus now changing over to the suburbs. And I had to transition my mindset and say, all right, there's more to it than just crime fighting. There's other things that
Right.
you have to do.
Yeah, like you said, that is a mindset shift to go from protecting to serving. And while you do both simultaneously in both departments, it's just the magnitude of one versus the other is different.
Yeah.
So, you know, oftentimes police officers go through the role, like I said, you're in 14 years, and they're not immune to the outside forces. You mentioned you don't have to go overseas as a police officer. You're able to be home with the family. And part of this podcast is so people to realize that officers go through some of the same trials and tribulations that everybody else does in life. Can you explain, can you share with us a time where maybe you experienced some kind of personal level of tragedy that occurred during your time as an officer and how you balance handling that personal side of things with the work side?
Yeah. So I guess I'll kind of go back a little bit, and when you're in the academy, your instructors they always say, like, you guys are becoming police officers. You guys have to be better than everybody else. You have to be different than everybody else, and they kind of put it in your head that that's what you're supposed to be. And in the beginning, you kind of think of it like, yeah, I got a job. I was vetted. They do all these background checks. They do they winded up calling my very first employer. They found, ex-girlfriends that I couldn't even tell like where they came from. So like they do very good background checks. And it's unlike another job that maybe you could just get within a week after a couple interviews. But at the end of the day, we're all the same. Like we're all, what you do and what I do, everything's the same.
Yeah.
So tragedy wise, I mean, my dad died at a fairly young age for me. He battled cancer, lung cancer. He winded up, being another survivor, lasting another 10 years before cancer came back and took his life. And for me, I went right back to work because I didn't want to sit around home. I didn't want to think about things. I went right back to work because work, and this is just like for most people, get your mind off it. And you could
Right.
go back to, if I'm chasing a criminal or writing reports, I'm not thinking about, the tragedy of just losing my dad at a early age. So that was the thing that hurt me. And I don't think there's a real, good way of saying how do you balance that with work, or how do you mentally prepare for that, or how do you deal with it. I think you just got to keep moving forward and know that life goes on.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, John. Losing a father at a young age is tough for sure. And like I said, I think most of us, whatever profession you're in, your work becomes your distraction from the thoughts, because when you're home, it just festers, right? And that's very true. So I'm sorry to hear that, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I'm sure many individuals have experienced similar tragedy in their life. Fast forward to present day, then, you have your family time with work, school, work, whatever you're working on from college days to now. What's the typical Saturday like for you? What do you get to do in your free time?
So it's kids. So from the single version of me, it was everything was work, and it was the job. It was police officer. It was, hey, you have a free Saturday coming off, and I would just get a phone call. Hey, you want to work on Saturday? Sure. Now with 3 kids, I don't really have that luxury, and a wife.
Yeah.
I want to be home, and it took me a while to understand that mentally. You got to get your mind off work all the time, and that's what it was. I was always waiting for that phone call to say, "Hey, you want to go to work? You want to go to work?" And yeah, I did. Now it's what the free Saturday to me is: kids' birthday parties, summer. You want to go hang out in the pool. It's whatever their schedule is. Baseball, if they want to play, if they're in basketball. I mean, I just ask my wife, "Hey, what are we doing this Saturday?" And she tells me, and that's what it is. And then there's obviously work. I try to
Right.
squeeze in some hours of work, as much as I can, whether it's at midnight or whether it's early in the morning. Whatever I could get it in. It's difficult to manage everything, but it's enjoyable because I enjoy what I do.
Yeah, and we'll cover more about some of the things you do with outside of law enforcement as well. But the part you mentioned is that balancing of time with family. And before, when you were younger, you took the phone call because it wasn't just work, but it was overtime pay. And it was a benefit to that. Like I said, we'll talk more about that as we go through. But that's one of the things too. When you have no other responsibilities, that phone call, you're ready to go out there and just keep earning money and loving what you're doing.
Yep.
There's a stereotype that law enforcement officers love donuts. I think everybody loves donuts, right? But if you're out driving around, if it's not donuts, what is your go-to fast food joint? If you have minimal time, what is it?
So when I was in Philadelphia, I worked so much. You really can't pack a lunch because there's nowhere really to store it, and it's crazy that the cars are so dirty. You don't even want to keep your food in the lunchbox sometimes, or you got blood or brain matter in the back seat, so you're just like uncomfortable keeping food in the car. And I worked so much, I didn't pack a lunch, I didn't do anything, I just ate out. And plus, you're in a big city, so there's options.
Right.
So now transitioning over to suburbs, everything closes like 8, 9 o'clock, and you know, at best you're going to Wawa, you're going to Seven. I don't know if you guys have Wawas out there.
We do.
You're going to Wawa, you're going to 7-Eleven, you're going to anything quick and convenient. Dunkin' Donuts. Do I think that's a myth about Dunkin' Donuts as far as cops eat donuts? Sure, I do. But I think the reason that it exists is because a lot of people are drinking coffee, so they'll go to Dunkin' Donuts for a coffee, or yeah, at 12 o'clock at night, and Dunkin' Donuts may be open. You go to Dunkin' Donuts, and yeah, maybe I'll get a donut with it. So there is a truth to it, but I mean, for the most part, if you ate donuts every day, you would be 300 pounds, and it would be a short life for you. So for me, there's really no fast food. I pack a lunch every day at work, but the only fast food that I do is with the kids. So if the kids want to do, we do Cake Pop Friday. So every Friday,
Okay.
my 4-year-old's like, "Hey, Dad, it's Cake Pop Friday at Starbucks, right?" So then we go to Starbucks, and then Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A is always a nice one for the kids. Get our milkshakes and our food, and I'll partake in that.
I have to say, my children, I think Chick-fil-A is their top spot they always want to go to. And then cake pops they love as well. I don't know why. I hate the idea of, taking my children to Starbucks, but they're really not going to Starbucks for coffee. They're going to
Yeah.
Starbucks for cake pops. Yeah, the myth, like you said, it's really born out of necessity, right? What was
Mhm.
open 24 hours back in the day besides 7-Eleven? Dunkin' Donuts. And now,
Yeah.
it's not just donuts, now they serve a whole variety of different items you can get at various times of the day. So if we take out the fast food, if there's a food that you just say, you know what, the one meal I love to enjoy at home with the family, this is the comfort food meal. What is it? Who prepares it?
Pizza. So I could do pizza. I could do anything red sauce. Pizza, spaghetti. Obviously it's all ordered out. My
Right.
wife makes really good spaghetti. So we'll eat spaghetti. Sushi. I love sushi. I mean, that's another takeout food, but those things I could eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner if I had to. The other key note that I'll say as a police officer. So breakfast kind of fell out the wayside as a police officer for me. I used to always wake up in the morning, um, living at home when I was younger, and you smell bacon.
Oh,
Mom's downstairs making bacon. So
great
you wake
smell,
up,
actually.
yeah, you wake up to the smell of bacon. But as I was a police officer, I learned either I was coming home late, going right to bed, or I was waking up so early and then being too busy, I never ate breakfast. So now there's times even for dinner when the wife's like, "Hey, you want to make, can I make breakfast for dinner?" Absolutely, because it's like bacon and eggs. I don't eat that much anymore. So that's one of the things that I enjoy for dinner anymore.
That's unique. Yeah, I was thinking you were going to go with the idea that your breakfast and lunch as a police officer is around the clock.
Yeah.
Your shift changes. I always have this debate with my daughters and my wife. Pizza to me, it can be cold pizza, it can be heated up pizza. I'm good at pizza either way. And they're like, no, 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 pizza has to be heated up. Yeah, debate.
Yeah.
Now, the pizza part of it, is it thin crust, thick crust? I mean, you're in Philly, but you have New York to one side, you have Illinois to the other side. You're in the middle of thick crust people and thin crust people.
Pizza's all over the place here, so or all over the place. So like, yeah, they're depending on where you go, you could get your typical like Pizza Hut
Yeah.
pizza, or you get real thin crust, or then people try to get fancy, and I just or it's all over the place. But it's a good place to eat around here.
I have to say, I'm a thin crust pizza guy. I like the pizza where it's a little bit crispy on bottom. I can snap it in half and fold it and eat it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you mentioned, your wife says, "What would you like to eat?" What about household chores? Not saying your wife tells you to do chores. As we're married, we all know we share responsibilities. But
Yeah.
what is the chore around the house that when you wake up and it's a Saturday and you're like, "Oh, the kids don't have anything going on today," and then that dread comes to your mind, that chore that has to be done.
So the thing about me, and I'm kind of a little bit of a neat freak, and but only on the things that I really care about. So like one thing that I do all the time is yard work.
Okay.
So I don't cut my own grass, but as far as like weeds and leaves and twigs and everything that like falls on the ground, I have to pick them. So I'll go around one day and I'll just start picking all the weeds, but then they grow back just as soon as you pick them. So that is one thing that bothers me. And I grew up in the city, so I never had to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Now moving to the suburbs where I live now, you have all this yard work. So for whatever reason, I am dead set on picking every weed that I can, but that's what bothers me. I don't like to do it, but I do it all the time, if that makes sense.
Well, you do it all the time because you want it to be perfect, but
Yeah,
then you hate doing it because they come back 3 days later.
right. Yeah, that's the one thing that inside house chores, they don't bother me too much. I could do that all day.
Excellent. So, law enforcement community experiences a lot. The non-law enforcement experience different things in life. What is something that you would say that as a law enforcement officer that you go through or plan for on a regular basis that you can empathize with, or people who are in non-law enforcement can empathize with? What is the relatability you think between the two areas?
So I don't think there's one thing that I could tell you. All I can tell you is that in the beginning, like I was talking earlier about when you're in academy, they try to give you, say you're different than everybody else. You have to act differently. You have to be differently. You're supposed to be a better example. But if you break all that down, my job is no different than most other people. I mean, you do different things, but if I'm working overnights, well, so is the guy at 7-Eleven behind the counter. You know, it, my hardest job that I ever had in my life was working at FedEx, and that was overnights as well when I was in college. And you weren't sleeping well. They're weird hours, and then you go home, you get a couple hours of sleep, and then you have to do normal day things if you want to be part of society.
Right.
So that's kind of the way policing is. You're working nights. You got to come home, and maybe you lack sleep, so you could go to the baseball game at 9 o'clock in the morning, to watch your kids. So I try to look at it as it's not a police thing. I hope people could get away from it a little bit and just say, like, well, there's tons of people that work overnight. They're just not doing exactly what police work is doing. Maybe they're not driving around all night, which could kind of make you a little bit more tired. But I mean, truckers do it,
Yeah.
depending on their hours. So, like, if you relate police work to other jobs, I think we could start breaking that barrier of, police work so much different than other jobs. I mean, different aspects of it. I think the only thing police work has that, if you're a trucker and you're driving nights, all right, maybe you're not, seeing people shot, or you're not, running around at 3 in the morning trying to catch somebody breaking into cars. And it's a little bit different. But I mean, the hours are the same. They still do, they have sleep struggles, and, maybe they're doing extra overtime to make extra money. So I can relate, anything and empathize with people. I always say, prior to kids, one of the greatest things that I did as a police officer mentally, I felt that I was numb to all the things that I was seeing. I couldn't relate to it. You see a kid shot, you take them to the hospital, everyone's crying, everyone's upset. Like, it's sad and it's upsetting,
Absolutely.
but that last emotional piece wasn't there for me. And then I had my first son, and I remember my very first call after having my first son. This lady got in a car accident. She had 3 kids in the car. They're all screaming, they're crying, she's flipping out. And I immediately said to myself, oh, if that was me, my kid would be screaming, it would be chaotic. And I'm rolling up as a police officer and I'm saying, relax, go sit in your car. I remember telling her, go sit in your car, chill out with your kids, I'll take care of everything. And then that was the first police officer experience for me, having kids, where I totally connected where that that lady was with her kids in the car accident. So little things like that. But for the most part, I think you can empathize with everything if you break it down, little by little, of job versus what a police officer does.
Yeah, and really the experience of having children made you a different type of police officer. Like
Yeah.
that, you actually expanded your police officer style because you knew you still had to do the core part of the job that you always did, but now the emotional piece of it was different, and you had to balance that emotional piece of still protecting and serving,
Hmm.
but also the uh, the
Yeah,
empathetic aspect.
I would say in Philadelphia, out of all the kids that I've seen shot, and then obviously when I'm talking about kids, I'm talking about anyone like 17 and under, and I've seen, I forget the youngest. She was either like 2 or 3, and she was shot. And you're throwing them in your car, and you're taking them to Children's Hospital, and you're hoping that they survive whatever the injury may be. But I didn't have any kids.
Yeah,
I went to the suburbs after I had kids, and some of the things sting me a little bit differently now. I haven't had to scoop any kids up that were shot since, but if I was in Philadelphia still doing the same stuff, I'd be doing that every day. And then how much would that weigh on me? So for me, I see that. Like, you go through 25 years of doing that every day, and if I would have 3 kids now, that would hit me a lot harder. It is, and maybe now I'm kind of dodging the bullets a little bit, if you want to say, in the suburbs where it's not as crazy.
yeah, and you said it's just the mental aspect of it and how it impacts you as an officer. And members of the law enforcement community experience some of the highest levels of stress. We often talk about how officers work overtime to make ends meet, and trying to balance the mental aspect of things that go on in their role, especially when they have children. How have you found a way to balance work and family, and while also being able to enjoy living your life every day, but also then preparing for your future post law enforcement, possibly?
I think I lucked out on timing. I think my experiences of before I was in law enforcement, starting to invest what little money I had prior to being in law enforcement, I think that gave me the tool to keep on investing after I became a police officer. I think in the beginning, like I said earlier, I worked every ounce of overtime I could. I did about 1,300 hours on average a year on overtime. I mean,
Wow.
if you do the math, I mean, there's 0 days off, and if I did get a day off, that's because I worked, 3 or 4 doubles throughout the week to get that one day off.
Okay.
So again, I only did it for 6 years, and I had no kids. So for me, I had the time where I could do that, and I had the energy when I was younger. But what I started to see getting older is that many officers continue to do that. It was like a lifestyle for them. They got so used to doing it early on, and they never stopped doing it. However, they added kids to the mix, they added family to the mix, and their bills their bills grew, and it became of, they would get that phone call for overtime, and it didn't matter if your kid had a birthday. It wasn't, hey, I got to call my wife to see if I could do it. It was just like, sure, I'll take the overtime, and whatever happened happened. And I've noticed, guys were working 30 years and they're still doing the same thing, but they're divorced once or twice. They hardly see their kids. They're miserable. They're either burnt out, or financially they're like, I have to work 30 hours of overtime each paycheck in order to survive. So I saw those signs with me early on. I even saw with relationships that most relationships didn't work out. And when I met my wife, she was kind of the same way, and she was the one that really brought it to my attention, like, hey, you keep doing this, because I was in Philly at the time. She's like, I get it, but when we have kids and you keep doing this, it's not going to work out. So then for me, she was like, well, why don't you make the switch to the suburbs where you'll get paid a little bit more and it's not as crazy and maybe you won't work as many hours as you do now. And for me, it was like immediate. It was an immediate connection as far as I don't have to worry about them calling me for overtime. Like because if I got that phone call, I didn't have the willpower to say no. It was sure, 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 sure. So when I switched, some suburbs don't have that much overtime. Sometimes they do, but when you're in a big city like Philadelphia, it's Phillies games, it's Eagles games. There's always something going on.
Right.
So for me, it was just removing myself out of that because I saw what was going on, and I still see it in the suburb departments. Guys are working 20 to 30 years and they're burning themselves out the last couple of years to maximize their pensions. And I understand why they're trying to do it. But in my mind, I'm going, if you're 55 years old and you're working all this overtime just to maximize your pension of an extra $200 a month per paycheck, it's not worth it because you're destroying your health more, not being around your family. But if you start it financially as a young officer doing certain steps, you would never have to do any of this stuff. And for me, I have so much more free time because of the path that I've taken, but I don't think I planned for the path. I think yes, I did certain steps early on, but that's only because I learned investing before I became a police officer. I think if I was a police officer without learning investing, I would probably just be in the normal habits like everyone else because all you're around cops. Most cops don't understand investing or they're not financially sound. So that's where I would get most of my advice. So I started prior, and now that's where I'm trying to teach other people to maybe take some better financial advice in the beginning of your career.
Tell us a little more about that. We talked about earlier. You founded a Drozdowski Group, and you talked about officers trying to create financial freedom for their future, and it does affect their mental well-being as well, their overall well-being. So tell us a little bit more about the group and how it's actually being utilized to help officers obtain financial freedom.
So it's basically I started the Drozdowski Group in 2023 in November, and it's not even hard work. It's just a reflection of what I've done throughout my life. And for years, if I started, I started investing in 08, 09 when the big recession hit, and I saw how much money you could make, just by watching CNBC. I was watching on TV, and I'm like, how are these guys making all this money? And they're talking about things that I don't even understand. So I got interested in it, and because of being a police officer, when I started in the police academy, that was the biggest paycheck I ever got. And what you'll hear from cops will say, if you're a police officer, you're never going to be rich, but you're going to live comfortably. You're going to have your pension, which most people think that's enough, but really it's not. You have to do more than that. But what I'm trying to teach cops is if you put money away, and most people do this financially, they just go through advisors and they charge your fees and all that other stuff. But if you put money away and you do what I did, and it doesn't exactly have to be what I did, but you pay yourself first, you put money away, you see it grow. And prior to kids, it worked out for me because I could just invest as much as I can and the bills weren't there. Guys that I'm talking to now and girls that I'm talking to now as police officers, everybody wants to get rich quick. And I try to tell them, like, that's just not how it works. I mean, it's nice if you hit the next, Bitcoin or crypto or penny stock or whatever it may be. But I was like, you don't even have to do that. I mean, last year, what was it, like 23 or 28% the S&P did?
Yeah,
It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal year. And, some people see it as like, well, it's not enough. I want, 100% or 200%. But back to the mental health piece, I burned myself out in the beginning, but I was young and I could do it. And now financially, and this is what I'm trying to teach, is that you don't have to do that for your whole career. That your pension should be like icing on the cake by the time you retire. It shouldn't be your only source of income. And then when you get that phone call and say, hey, you want to work overtime? No, you tell them no. The power of no is great because you know that you don't need that money anymore.
Absolutely.
So for me, mentally, my life has changed. I don't let the job control me anymore. I love what I do, but as far as the job doesn't control me. And it's like, no, my kid's birthday is this weekend, where the kid, even if I just don't want to work, I'm home more. And family life, it's so much easier. My wife's not stressed out as much the way, she used to be. And uh, I get to see my kids. They like cry when I go to work. They're like, no, daddy, you can't go to work. And I'm like, I gotta, I enjoy it, but I don't have to force myself to go to work when I'm
Right.
not, when I don't have to.
Yeah, you're able to go the hours that you're expected to go
Yeah.
as part of your standard role as a police officer, but you don't have to pick up every shift that comes your way.
Right.
So, so what are you finding some of the obstacles that officers are giving you pushback on when you try to educate them on this and they just don't see that vision that you are trying to show them?
It's and I look at it from the way I grew up. My mom, dad they went to work every single day. They saved every penny that they could. We didn't take many vacations, but they didn't invest. And looking back, that's where they hurt themselves. They had all that money sitting in savings, and they just never invested it. So when I talk to officers today, especially the older ones, they're set in their ways. They're kind of like, I got my pension. I had my 457B. I have things set. And then when I try to talk to them about, like, well, do do you talk to your advisor every year? Do you try to have like a game plan? And they're like, no, I just whatever my advisor set me in, 20 years ago is what my funds are still in today. And yeah, right. And for some of those officers, they're all in like a money market or cash,
Ah,
because throughout those years, the company either transitioned to another company and they defaulted into a cash account or whatever the case may be. And I'm scratching my head going like it's simple 101 money. You just gotta, like anything else, if you want to be healthy, physically, you got to go to the gym,
right.
right? You don't have to put a lot of work in, but you got to do something, or you got to watch your diet. And for cops and for money, you know, it, think about it this way. So most people don't want to waste money, right? But
Right.
most people know how to change your own tire. They refuse to call somebody to go and say, "Hey, I'm going to charge you $100, $200 to change your tire for you." Well, for me, that's the same way as investing is. You pay these fees for somebody to manage your money, and they may never even call you. They may call you once a year, say, "Hey, you're going to contribute, or you're not going to contribute." But that 0.5% or whatever they may be charging you year after year after year after year, people don't realize that could be $100,000, $200,000, but depending on how much money you're putting in.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's what they've been doing for years. And I just scratch my head and say, you don't want to pay $100 to get your tire changed, but yet you're willing to pay 100 or $200,000 because you don't know enough about investing. But if you took the time to learn it, it's really not that complicated. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where I try to go with the Drozdowski Group, and try to get guys a little bit more hands on with their money so they could save themselves some extra money.
Now, are you seeing the shift where the younger officers who are coming in are starting to be more receptive, or do you think because of this, we're talking about two different generations of officers, but also two different generations of people. And,
Yeah.
and the younger individuals who are going to law enforcement now may have a different mentality about law enforcement or a mentality about what's owed to them as a society. So are you seeing the shift in how you're educating younger officers versus older?
There is the shift. I think the older officers are your conservative officers the way they've always been. Middle of the pack, I would say it's like a 50-50 split, and I consider myself more of the middle of the pack. But the younger officers coming in, I want to get rich quick. Crypto is obviously a big deal, and I
Right.
think that crypto is that's nothing that's going away anytime soon. That's
No.
here to stay. Um, and I've even throughout investing, a lot of guys have asked me. They say, what do you think about it? And in the beginning, I always liked it, but I would never say anything about it because I'm like, it's still kind of fairly new. But wherever you look, people are making tons of money off of it.
They are.
People are also losing tons of money off of it, depending on what you're doing. But
Right.
if you could stay, um, and I don't really get into like pick this, pick that. That's not really my job. But if somebody came to me and said, "What do you think about crypto?" If you play it smart, there's money to be made, and that's with anything. But I think your younger officers are a little bit more financial savvy, uh, especially because I try to. The ones that I talk to too is say, listen, your pension's not enough. Don't listen to the old guys because the old guys are going to tell you to save all your money, and sitting in a bank account does nothing for you. I
No.
mean, one,
Inflation eats away at it.
yeah, I had a an officer a while ago. He said, "Hey, I'm sitting with $100,000 in my cash account, money, money market." And again, I'm like scratching my head. I'm saying, listen, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money, but I am going to tell you that the S&P on average gives you 11% a year. Some's a lot higher, some years is a lot lower. So you're giving up $11,000 a year. Think of all the overtime that you have to put in to make that $11,000. And like
Yeah.
they start scratching their head and they go, yeah, that's true. I was like, and if you're never going to touch that $100,000 and you don't need it right away, throw it in the stock market. Let it earn you more money. And people just aren't used to it. So it's kind of just changing everyone's mindset. I think the younger officers coming in, they're a little more accepting of it,
Right.
but still, and I don't like to generalize people, but I look at myself. My family never did that. They never invested. It was just work, save, work, save, work, save. And most people don't even save. It's just work, spend, work, spend.
Works, man.
And it's just changing that mentality where it doesn't have to be that way. The newer guys, my number one pet peeve on the newer guys that come in is buying that, $70,000 truck. I'm telling you, it's everywhere. It's not like if you just go to Texas and they're like, everything's bigger in Texas, let me buy a big truck.
Right.
It's people, they come in and they see everyone else driving these big trucks for $70,000 and they go out and they buy it. They're like, hey, I got a steady paycheck now. This is just seems what everyone does. I probably want to be well liked, so let me go buy, a big truck. The worst thing you could do. It's the worst thing you could do. And I just try to maybe just tell them certain things to maybe help them out and change your mindset.
And you're speaking to officers as not a financial advisor, so like I said, so you're being cautious about giving advice, but you're speaking to them as a fellow officer. So is that one of the things that they still give you pushback on, or do they actually understand that you're talking to them as a fellow and not as someone who's charging them fees to manage their money?
So for me, I think it helps a lot. And I look at it from when we would have advisors and people come in, different insurance agents, and they would come in and they give their little sales pitch as far as what police officers should do while you're either in the academy or you're, reporting on for your shift. I look at them just as like another suit, and I look at them and say, hey, listen, regardless of what your experience is, probably if I had to guess, you're only somebody who's been with the company for 5 years. You're kind of on entry level sales and investing at this point, and some officers make good money depending where they live. Other places do not, depending on cost of living and everything like that. But I look at it as if you're not wealthy yourself, how can you give me wealth advice? And they all do. They all come in, and I look at them like, listen, I looked into being a financial advisor one time. They told me that I needed to be within a financial institution who needed to sponsor me, and that they were going to pay me stipends until I get certified with all my certifications, and that I couldn't do it while I was a police officer. I tried to do it while I was a police officer. They would tell me that you need it to be full time, and I said okay, but I would rather give it or take advice from anyone else that knows what they're doing with their money. And I walk into certain places and I talk to certain guys, and I don't like to brag about how much money that I have. But
Right.
that is a point where I could, it's flexing, but it's for a good reason. Whereas, hey guys, like I did this as a cop. I didn't make a lot of money. I think when I started in Philadelphia, I think we were like a little under 70,000 for base.
Yeah.
And I was pushing maybe close to 130,000 a year on overtime.
Yeah.
And I was just saving it, investing it, saving it, and investing it. And I'm telling the guys, like, now I make more money investing than I do at my job.
Right.
And like their mind is like blown in a way. And I said, I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy that kind of cared about my finances. And now I'm just trying to teach other people on how to do it. So it's not complicated. It's just you got to stick to your plan and stick with the process.
Now, you've written a book, John, right, about this for officers, and it's not just officers. We know we're talking about officers, but you actually are willing to work with any first responders too, who are interested. Just law enforcement's where you're in, and that's who sees it. So, individuals who are interested in learning more about the Drozdowski Group, learning more about what you're offering, how can they reach out to you? How can they connect with you? How can they download the book? Like I said, I read it myself. It was a an easy read, and I appreciate easy reads because my attention span for long reads is not always good. So I appreciate it. It was an easy read. It was very straightforward and simple instructions to follow. So how would you communicate this to others who are
Well,
interested?
you could find it at the drozdowskigroup.com. And then obviously with social media, I try to be on as much social media as I can. Um, your LinkedIn, your Facebooks, Instagrams, X. I try to do a lot of them that I can. So you could always find it. Um, I don't try to hide anything. The book, like you said, I wrote it because the message is hard to get out to people. When I kept everything to myself before I even officially formed the company, you would talk to officers and I would talk to certain people, and nobody wants to be told what to do with their money. Where
Right, right.
everyone thinks that they know what they're doing, or no, I already have a plan, I already have an advisor. And I'm just trying to give advice as far as, strategies on what to do or tips to do as a police officer. Now, as far as helping first responders to police officers, I'll help anybody. I mean, I know there's organizations out there, and I know it was First Generation Investing, I believe, or First Generation is the organization called. They go to high schools and I believe colleges too, and they try to teach students. But
Nice.
I'll help anybody. But the thing is that I'm always around police officers and I see the struggles that they go through. So for me, it's easier. And I already
Yes.
know I know what their paychecks are. I got the
It's
men
not a
and
secret.
women. Yeah, it's not a secret. I know what you're making. And then you can't tell me that you can't do it because I know. And then when they say, well, I got kids. And I say, well, listen, I got kids too. And even though I make more money, I still try to spend my paycheck. I don't try to splurge on things, but mentally it's so much easier knowing that you have the money if something comes up that you're not I got to work, three more overtime shifts just to afford it. I already know it's there. So
Right,
I'll
right.
help anybody. I just kind of focus on police officers and first responders because that's who I'm surrounded by, and I know mentally it'll help them out. But back to what you were saying about um, police officers and first responders are no different than anybody else. Everybody has money problems. I mean, divorce rates are 50%, and they said the majority of it's because everyone has money problems.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's I could help my next door neighbor if they want. I could help police officers. I really just want to help people learn because even down the road, say your next door neighbor, their kids grow up to be police officers or whatever the case may be. It's just getting that education out there because even schools don't teach half the stuff that I'm trying
Yeah.
to strategies and hey, just save a little bit of money, invest a little money. Schools don't teach that.
No, they
So
don't.
it's just something that needs to be done.
And, you mentioned that you were watching CNBC. You took up to learn on your own. While you have the Drozdowski Group to provide assistance to individuals and to learn about it, education is free when it comes to looking stuff up. They can learn how to invest, how to save. It's those opportunities are out there. But I think for officers throughout the country, you're a resource for them because you're one of them too. So that relatability factor, like I said, makes it easier because most of us are willing to listen to someone who walks in our shoes every day. And the fact that you walk in the same police officer's shoes as the hundreds of thousands throughout the country, right? There's someone they can look to and say, he's done it just like me. Like you mentioned, he's not the insurance salesman who's in here making a commission off of selling me this product or trying to tell me how to do investments when they're sitting in the cushy office all day just making these calls. I
Yeah.
think that mental shift is a big difference. And I really, my background comes from the financial industry before I got an education, and there's a lot of things I saw that people didn't do to prepare adequately to save and invest. And I think it's something that is, it's passionate for you to help the officers, and I stand behind it. I think what you're doing with the Drozdowski Group is phenomenal, and because, like I said, the pension was always the great thing, but the pension is the security blanket, like I said, right? It's the icing on the cake. The same thing with the gentleman I know retired from the military. He said, my pension means I have a mortgage payment paid every month. It's everything else that I live with and live
Yeah.
off of, and it's definitely a great setup. You know, part of our mission, as we go back to, as you said at the end here, is that we want people to realize that law enforcement officers are not much different than everybody else. We all go through many of the same things in life. And one of the things is also building those bridges to the community. So what would you say, for the best way for law enforcement officers to build, or for officers, actually members of the community to also help build those bridges to the law enforcement officers and those who are serving together so that way we can actually have better relationships and work together in the community.
So this is a I've been doing this for 14 years, And I would say for the past, at least the last half, let's just say 7 years, maybe even 10 years, the biggest push to policing is community policing. I agree with community policing, but where I have issues with community policing is that that has taken a um, priority over policing. So for me, I look at it from a private sector standpoint as far as you can't run a company or you can't sell a product unless it's a good product or a good service.
Right.
And if it's a crappy product or service, you could do all the advertising you want, but it's just not going to work. And financially, you're just going to go bankrupt. The company's going to go under. I'm under in my opinion, we worry about so much community policing that we forget to do the policing part. So I think kind of getting back to basics is what I would like to see. And I've been in patrol my whole entire career. So I'm not sitting behind a desk. I'm not saying these are the things we need to do for community wise. I just think there's members of the community that want community policing. But if I'm a member of the community, I just want a safe community. Like I don't want to interact with police. I want it to be truthfully. I want it to be the way I was when I was a kid. I want it just to try to live in the best neighborhood that I could. I want to make as a police officer. I just want to keep everyone safe. And I think if you can instill a safe community as best as you can, and the community sees that you're really out there trying, then they respect you more. And if your community's not that safe, they're going, well, at least those officers, they're out there, busting their butts and they're trying it all they can. I think that's how you get respect more versus just doing the community policing and then you're forgetting about all the other stuff. I think we need to focus back on the base. It's kind of like baseball, right? So if you go through a slump, they want you to go back and work on your T work and work on the basics, and then hopefully it gets you out of your slump. And I think we kind of, as police officers and organizations, need to take a step back and say, let's get back to basics. Not forget about community policing, but just don't make that the priority. And then, your other stuff is struggling as far as patrol and crime and the things that people want to see.
Yeah, the byproduct of good policing is good communities.
Yeah.
And like I said, as a kid, you went to the other side of the street when your officers were there, right? You didn't want to give them a reason to bring you into it per se, and you respected them. What is true, because if you are safe in your community, you feel comfortable in your community, you'll feel comfortable also talking to an officer if you need to. You'll feel comfortable reaching out in a time of need, versus the opposite. If the community is unsafe, you don't know what's going on. But, that's a great astute point there, John, because you do hear the emphasis on community, 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 but it's a marriage of the two, and policing is what you're actually hired to do.
Right.
So you mentioned about a career in the financial field, or looked at it once before, you thought about it. So if you had to do all over again, though, would you still pursue the career in law enforcement, or would it be a different path for you?
I would. I would. I struggle when I go back to whatever my regrets may be. Would I want to join the military as soon as I hit 18? That would be my thing. Parting was that I really missed that cool part of my life at 18, and maybe I should go back and try to do that. But going forward for policing, I'm having a blast. I wouldn't change anything. I would still do it. I think where a lot of cops, because when you ask that question, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, no, I wouldn't do it. Especially the older officers that I talk to, they say the game's changed, public doesn't respect you, the job's changed a lot. So a lot of people will tell you probably no. But when I'm saying, yeah, I would, I guarantee you I could go back to where I work and they'll be like, oh, you're crazy for saying that. And I'm going to tell them, I'm going to say, am I? Because the way I look at it is my years as a police officer were different than their years. If they get caught up in the job and they're living, overtime shift to overtime shift and working on, burning themselves out and mentally just, checked out and their life is just spiraling, I'm like, well, I didn't have that experience because I slowed everything down, and financially I didn't have to do all that stuff. And I changed the course of my career where I'm not falling into those lines, like mentally I'm here, I'm not worried about, drinking. I don't drink. Suicide rates, that's a thing that people talk about a lot. Suicide rates with police officers. I don't have those mental issues. So like my career, I don't feel I'm damaging myself physically and mentally the way a lot of people that would say, no, I wouldn't do it again. The only thing that I think I can't change, the question that a lot of people say is, would you want your kids to be police officers? That is one that I struggle with. And I would never tell my kids not to be police officers. Because even now, they run around the house and they go, "Hey, Daddy, you're locked up," or "I want to be a police officer." I mean, so I like it because I think kids need to get back into that police officer cool in order for more people to want to be police officers.
Right, absolutely.
But
I did it as a
so
kid a lot myself, running around pretending to be a police
yeah, I
officer.
love it. So there was when I was in Philadelphia, there was probably I was younger, so maybe like 4 years in. I went to my partner and I went to his kid's kindergarten graduation. And usually, when you get up there, everyone's like, "Hey, I want to be a policeman. I want to be a fireman. I want to be a doctor." You get that one astronaut. It was all singers, dancers, artists, and his son was the only one that wanted to be a police officer. And I thought to myself, "Wow, the younger generation just doesn't want to be police officers." And you're starting to see that now in recruiting, and people just don't want to be cops the way they used to. So I want it to be cool again, so people can look up and say, "Hey, I want to be a police officer." I think that's kind of what helped me out. But as far as my kids, I think the real struggle is not seeing them or the schedule. If they could live the life that I did, mentally keeping everything in check, then I'm all for it. But they have to realize that you may not be home for Christmases. You may not be, Christmas Eve is a big one with my family. You may not be there Christmas Eve, and if they're okay with that sacrifice, which I'm okay with for now, but I don't know if at this point in my career, my kids are still young. I'm okay with it. But maybe in another 10 years, when I'm, missing certain events because of my job, I might take a look back and say, maybe now it's time to retire, but I could do that. Most people can't do that. So
Right.
I think I would still do it again. If my kids want to do it again, they could do it. I would just kind of fill them in on some of the sacrifices, the hidden sacrifices that nobody actually looks at when they're filling out the application.
Yeah, you hit one on the head, Christmas Eve, birthdays and stuff. If that's just part of your regular schedule, that's not the overtime shift. That's just your schedule that you just
Yeah.
can't, say no to, right? That's a whole different setup. And, and I'm glad you brought the children up because that's one of those things that you're living it, but then your children. However, what's allowed you to enjoy it is you prepared for your financial future beyond the law enforcement, beyond the pension, right? And I would have to believe that you'll be preparing your children also to invest properly. So no matter what career they go into, they always have the investment component of it as well. So if they choose law enforcement, great, but they're setting themselves up. They don't have to take every overtime shift. And that alone, you mentioned a few times throughout today's episode, is that the mental well-being is so crucial. And I know you mentioned LinkedIn, and I know you've posted some stuff on LinkedIn I found captivating where you reference the suicide rates and how much they've changed over time and what they are with law enforcement. And that mental fitness is so crucial. And if individuals are going into it, the expectation of what could come has to be real.
Yeah.
So, but I appreciate you going into more detail on that answer there. Individuals throughout our community are going about everyday life, and they all want to remain safe. As an active police officer, what is a safety tip that you'd offer individuals to keep in
So,
mind as they go about their everyday life?
there's always a lot of different ones that you could pinpoint, right? But for me, that's an easy one. Don't or First of all, lock your car doors. Okay, lock your house. I don't care where you live. Lock your house. That way it doesn't make it easy for people to just jiggle your handle, see it's open, steal something, especially with your cars. Stop answering phone calls from people you don't know. I mean, everyone has caller ID, and if they say they're from wherever, some company for XYZ, and they need to fix something, nobody calls for that anymore. So stop answering phone calls that you don't know, and stop clicking on emails that you have no clue where they're from, because they're all scams. So
Right.
if you take just those simple things that everyone should be able to do, pretty quickly, I don't know a percentage on it, but that's like 40% of the reports that I take every single day. And then you could free me up to actually go fight, better, more crime than worry about taking reports over, oh, I answered this phone call and then I clicked on these links and then, I left my car unlocked and they stole all the stuff out of my car. I'm like, well, if you just locked your car, then we wouldn't be here. Just simple things like that.
I've never realized that they actually will report emails and phone calls that they've answered.
Yeah.
I would think with the emails that they would just move on from it and realize what they did.
You would think, but it's getting so sophisticated these days that you're getting an email, you don't know what it is, then you're clicking on the link, and then somebody's calling you. How they're calling you, I have no idea, but that's way above my pay grade. And then they're saying, "Hey, download this app," and then people are downloading the app, and then the scammers are getting access to your computer, and then from there it's a mess. So,
Yes.
but all you have to do is just not answer it. I don't know what this is. If they're saying it's your credit card bill, then you call your credit card company up and see, hey, is this you? Is it not you? So um, there are simple things that you could do to kind of give us a break from taking those reports.
That's unbelievable. I appreciate you sharing that because, like I said, those are basic, and every single individual nowadays usually has a cell phone in their hand everywhere they go, right? So if it's an email, it's a text, it's a phone call, we can ignore it, we can move on, and if it's important, we'll get a message.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I appreciate you, Officer Drozdowski, for taking the time to be with us today. I really enjoyed this interview, especially the insight you shared. The Drozdowski Group, I think, is a phenomenal setup that you've created to help with local first responders and law enforcement officers. And you provided some insight into the law enforcement community that I think will help other individuals who are not currently members of the community see that, like everything, officers in the community are just like everybody else. So we appreciate you taking the time to be a part of the episode today. Wish you much continued success in your service and really, truly appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. And again, I appreciate what you do to try to help us out to make policing cool again. And yeah, I'm going to go upstairs with my kids. We're going to go build a snowman, and then I'm going to go to work. I have to night shift tonight. So
Well, I
that's
know
what I'm doing.
you're in the Pennsylvania area, so stay warm. I know you had some pretty cold weather coming through yesterday,
Yeah,
today, and tomorrow.
yeah. Hopefully that's it. I think it was we had 3 snowfalls so far. That's enough for me and shovel.
It was a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to a future conversation we might have as well, sir.
Thank you, Scott. Have a good day.
You too. If you liked this episode, follow us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Provide us your feedback in the comments and leave us a rating or review. We truly appreciate your opinion, and you can follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook to get all the latest updates. Remember, you can always find places that will share negative law enforcement news stories, but here at Your Positive Lens, you will only find your positive law enforcement news stories. Once again, I'm your host, Scott T. Thanks for listening, and we'll capture you on the next Your Positive Lens.